I'm Peter Brace. Good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Brace, Chairman of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. I'm going to convene this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for Tuesday, May 13th, 2025 at 10 a.m. I'm going to do a roll call to see who's here, and then I'll read my little script. So members, Doug Rose.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Sorry, I've got no sound. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Jen.
Okay.
Jen Carberg. I can hear you, Jen. And Matt Fee. And I'm Peter Brace. Staff. Leah Hill.
Here.
Vince Murphy.
Here.
Anticipated speakers, Kat McCandless, City of Boston.
Here.
Welcome. Okay, so.
Peter, it looks like Rachel just hopped on too,
Okay,
under Susan.
okay. Rachel, you there?
Hi guys, I'm here. I'm Susan for the moment, but I will work on changing that.
Okay. All right.
And Pete, I'm in now. I can hear. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen.
Yep.
Good morning. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There's to be no crosstalk with others in attendance. To be recognized for making a public comment, use the raised hand feature by clicking on the reaction tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then click on the raised hand button. When you've finished your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we need your invaluable input. We view public comment as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and do not disparage other speakers or the members of this committee. Okay. First order of business is public comment on any item not on this agenda. Do we have any public comments that fit that description? Okay, seeing none. Approval of the minutes, March 25, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes by Doug Rose, a second by Matt Fee. Are there any edits at all? Okay, all those in favor? Doug Rose,
Aye.
Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Okay, today, first thing we're doing is a presentation on resilient Bennington Street and Frederick Park project in Boston and Revere by Catherine McCandless, the Senior Climate Resilience Project Manager for the City of Boston Office of Climate Resilience. All you, Kat.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and it's very nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for having me. As was said, my name is Catherine McCandless. I work with the City of Boston's Office of Climate Resilience, mostly focusing on our coastal resilience efforts for how we can prepare Boston's coastline for the impacts of sea level rise and storm surge and other coastal flooding hazards. I had the great pleasure of meeting, or really seeing, Leah and her team present on a similar project to what I'm going to be talking about today, a road raising project at the Stone Living Lab conference a few weeks ago. So thank you, Leah, for reaching out and inviting me to come and share the work that we're doing here in Boston in a similar project. So I'm going to pull up some slides. Hopefully these will share easily. All right, can everyone see?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. So this project is going to be the majority of my presentation today, but overall, I'm also going to start with a little overview of the City of Boston's coastal resilience planning and implementation work to give you a bit of background on the work that we've been doing here in the city over the last decade and how that's kind of shaping how we're approaching our implementation efforts across the city before I then dive into the Resilient Bennington Street and Fredericks Park project as kind of a case study. I do have Q&A reserved for the end of the presentation, but if you have any burning questions during the presentation, or if anything isn't clear, feel free to interject and ask during the presentation as well. All right. So you may be familiar with the city's Climate Ready Boston work. I feel like we've been fortunate that the name of our planning has kind of gotten its way around the state a bit. But the City of Boston's coastal resilience and really climate resilience work began back in 2016 when we released the Climate Ready Boston Plan. This was a citywide vulnerability assessment that looked at the different impacts of climate change on the city of Boston under different greenhouse gas emission scenarios to understand, what are we looking at in terms of rising temperatures, sea level rise, precipitation-based flooding, the frequency and intensity of coastal storms, if we continue to emit under a high greenhouse gas emission scenario versus if we're able to kind of curb those emissions, and how do we begin to prepare for those hazards across our city. So this plan, like I said, was citywide. It really looked at particularly the impacts of climate change that we're anticipating here in Boston, but of course this is also, I'm sure, very similar for Nantucket and for other New England cities and towns, but really thinking about the impacts of heat waves and droughts on Boston as a New England city that has not historically really dealt with the impacts of extreme temperatures, as well as the impacts of stormwater flooding. Our city is, of course, very dense and has a lot of impervious surface, so we definitely have experienced stormwater flooding in inland areas, but of course along the coast as well. And then as a coastal city like Nantucket, we have 47 miles of vulnerable coastline that we are working on addressing the impacts of flooding and sea level rise. Climate Ready Boston was essentially the first of a long series of different planning efforts that have since taken place across the city to really address climate risks in multiple areas of the city's work. So we have a list of, or a diagram of different planning efforts that have taken place across the city that range from coastal resilience planning efforts that I'll talk about a bit in more detail in this presentation, but also a heat resilience plan, an urban forest plan, our natural hazard mitigation plan with our emergency management office. We have a zoning overlay district for coastal resilience that was adopted into the municipal zoning code a few years ago. We have standards for designing within our public right-of-ways, adding green infrastructure into the city's parks and right-of-ways, open space plans that factor in the impacts of climate change and more. So Climate Ready Boston really kind of laid the stage for, we know where our risks are, we know that we have to address them, but there are a lot of different ways that we need to address them to kind of mainstream the work that we're doing across multiple departments in our planning, our policy, and our operations in our city. But coastal flooding is arguably our biggest risk within the city of Boston. And a lot of the reason for this is because the majority of Boston's waterfront didn't exist the way it exists today. Boston is vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal flooding largely because about a sixth of the Boston Harbor was built on landfill. So it was built at a very low elevation when we weren't thinking about the impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding in the long term. So this is a map on the left showing the landmass in 1630 contrasted with the 2016 shoreline, and then a map of future flood risk. And in a lot of places, you can see that there's almost a one-for-one correlation for where we anticipate flooding to be an issue in the future with where land was created in the past. So, for example, looking at in the South Boston waterfront and in East Boston, you can kind of see where there's a relationship between that future flood risk and the low-lying land that we have built. We have been very fortunate in Boston that we haven't experienced a major storm like those of Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Sandy. I imagine this is similar for Nantucket. But when we've experienced nor'easters in the winter months here in Boston, we have seen some pretty significant flooding in various parts of the Boston waterfront. So these are some images between 2018 and 2024 from different parts of the city's waterfront, from downtown to East Boston to the Charlestown Navy Yard and more. And this has really given us a glimpse of what the future has in store for us and the areas where we need to be taking action to prevent this from being an issue. So after the 2016 Climate Ready Boston Plan, we embarked on a series of coastal resilience plans for our 5 coastal neighborhoods in Boston. So this included planning efforts for East Boston, Charlestown, South Boston, the North End and downtown, and Dorchester. You'll notice that East Boston and Charlestown was split into 2 phases, and that's not because it was like, we took care of both neighborhoods and then we came back to it in the future. It actually covered different parts of each neighborhood since the first plan was kind of the first venture into this work, and then we circled back around a few years later to finish the analysis for the rest of the neighborhoods that weren't covered in the first phase. But by doing all of these coastal resilience plans, we have now developed an adaptation strategy for all 47 miles of Boston's coastline to understand where we need to take action at one point in time and what our options are for addressing this flood risk as it evolves. Each of these plans essentially had 4 main goals that were addressed in each plan. The first was to take a deeper look than what was included in the 2016 Climate Ready Boston Plan to better identify the location and timing of flood risk in the study area. I should note that we all, now have the fortune of using the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model as a state-adopted projection, but at the time that wasn't in effect, and so we were using a predecessor model to the MCFRM called the Boston Harbor Flood Risk Model to really take a look in Boston Harbor about what we were looking at and what our options were. Each of these plans also included a lot of stakeholder engagement with the different communities that we were working within, different levels of government and different departments of the city and the state, landowners, including private landowners, and more, to really identify the key priorities, opportunities, and constraints along each stretch of the coastline to understand what our different options are along the coast. We then worked with a team of consultants, including engineers, urban planners, and landscape architects, to develop conceptual coastal resilience strategies that would address that flood risk over time, but also provide multiple benefits for the community. So thinking about how our adaptation strategies wouldn't just keep water out, but also address additional goals that we heard from people in terms of access to the waterfront and ecological restoration where possible, and things of that nature. And then in each of these plans, we included an implementation roadmap that outlined the timing by which these strategies need to be constructed based on how flood risk evolves over time, and the next steps for advancing each proposed project in each neighborhood. We looked at a lot of different types of strategies across the city. So this is a very simplified set of diagrams looking at the different options in our toolkit. So thinking about, we have something called the Harbor Walk, which wraps the majority of the Boston Harbor with a publicly accessible walking space. So looking at where we might be able to elevate the Harbor Walk, which largely sits on seawalls, where we might be able to build elevated park spaces along the waterfront. More nature-based strategies like berms and restored dunes, wetland restoration, things like that, as well as harder infrastructure strategies like elevating roadways or building vertical flood walls, which is typically not our preference, but we recognize that there are parts around the city's waterfront where those are really the best option before us. And then while our coastal resilience plans don't focus on buildings and structures themselves, we did, of course, look at areas where building level adaptation would be the recommended approach, given the degree of risk being more, fringe flooding on the immediate waterfront as opposed to larger flood pathways into the city. When prioritizing project implementation, we have a range of different criteria that we use to think about where we should be prioritizing our work for first. I've already said this a few times, but of course it really at first is the timing of flood risk. So what areas of the city are vulnerable today and what areas will be vulnerable in the near term, which for us is 2030. We think about whether an area is at risk of being exposed to fringe flooding, so just flooding right on the immediate waterfront, versus being the location of a flood pathway that could impact the communities further inland. We also think about where there's an overlap between other climate hazards, such as extreme heat, and where there might be opportunities to address multiple climate risks within a project. We think about environmental justice criteria. We have a lot of environmental justice populations within the city of Boston. So thinking about where we're prioritizing projects based on who is going to be impacted the most and who would have the most difficulty rebounding after a major coastal flooding event. And then, of course, land ownership is a huge driver of where we're able to prioritize projects across the city. The city of Boston only owns about 16% of its waterfront. So the vast majority of our waterfront is owned by various state agencies and the private sector. So where there are projects the city owns, we've taken a lot of action to move those projects forward, but a lot of our work is also about willing partnership with other landowners along the city's waterfront. And then the bottom row of icons there just shows that we're also thinking about, building projects that specifically address the protection of affordable housing as a critical resource within the city, evacuation corridors so that people can exit the city safely during emergencies, critical transportation infrastructure such as the MBTA train system, the subway system that so many people in the region rely on to get in and out of the city on a daily basis. The protection of critical facilities, which for us is thinking about hospitals, fire stations, police stations, libraries, schools, things of that nature. And then our water dependent industrial uses, such as our shipping terminals and things like that, where we rely on the delivery of goods that serve Boston and the greater region. So that was planning. We are now actively in the implementation phase of work within the city of Boston. And we frequently explain to people that, planning is the first step in a series of actions to actually get this work into the ground. And with the work that we're doing, we're largely in the design engineering, final design and permitting stage. But we do have a few projects that have completed construction or are in construction currently. And we always conduct community and stakeholder engagement through every step of our various projects, phases, and evolutions. So now that we're in implementation, there are essentially 3 concurrent strategies that we're taking to address risk. I've been mostly talking about our work to identify the longer term projects in the city of Boston, but we kind of have learned to break down our implementation into 3 buckets, if you will. So the first is today's storms. What do we do if a storm hits tomorrow and we don't have these longer term adaptation projects constructed along our coastline? And so the key goal for that is to strengthen our response to today's flooding, largely by educating our residents about emergency preparedness, strengthening internal protocols for preparing for and responding to extreme weather, and operationalizing deployable barriers with our Office of Emergency Management and other city landowning agencies to make sure that we have an interim strategy in place as we're working towards those longer adaptation projects. This decade storm, we really are past this decade, I guess if you will, thinking about 2030 implementation. So really addressing those 2030 flood pathways is another major goal for us. This is actually where the bulk of my work falls and where the Bennington Street and Fredericks Park project really fits within these 3 strategies. So this is really focusing on advancing our near-term priority projects across the city that were identified in our 5 coastal resilience plans to move them from the planning phase to conceptual design and ultimately construction. This is really led by 3 different departments in the city, including the office I sit within, the Office of Climate Resilience, the Boston Planning Department, and our Parks and Recreation Department are kind of all leading the charge to bring these projects to fruition. And then last, beyond 2030, we have a broader goal, of course, of transforming our 47 miles of coastline to address this risk in the long term. We have an ongoing partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a coastal storm risk management study, which is essentially reevaluating all of the work that we did through the Climate Ready Boston Coastal Resilience Plans to help the Army Corps make their own recommendations and ultimately make those recommendations to Congress to help unlock funding for the city to be able to advance these projects more swiftly. Because as I'm sure you all have experienced, securing funding for these major infrastructure projects is not easy. And so by working with the Army Corps, we have an opportunity to have a 35% cost share with the federal government to be able to bring these projects into fruition faster. That is a 6-year study, though, and we're about halfway through, so we are not pausing on our work to address the 2030 flood pathways while we work with the Army Corps on this mid and long range study. Our ultimate goal, though, is to make a resilient Boston Harbor. So not just making it resilient to the impacts of flooding, but also giving spaces along the waterfront that are accessible and greener and, beautiful spaces for people to enjoy as a defining amenity of the city of Boston. So we are, working towards that every day with the work that we're doing in the city of Boston. We do have a website that I'd recommend saving in case you're interested, boston.gov/climate resilience, where you can find more information about all of these different planning initiatives that I have described. But also we have a page specifically on coastal resilience, one that talks about our planning efforts and another that shows an interactive tracking tool for looking at the different projects that we have underway. We have about a dozen projects that are in different stages of design and construction across the city's waterfront. And so you can learn more about those various projects through our Coastal Resilience Project Tracker that will also help you get to the specific project web pages. So now, based on that, I'm going to deep dive into the Resilient Bennington Street and Fredericks Park project, because as I mentioned earlier, this is seemingly a similar project to the work that Leah presented that's underway in Nantucket. This is a really interesting project for the city of Boston because it is actually the first project that we've embarked on that is working across municipal boundaries. So we are partnering with the city of Revere, who we share a border with in the neighborhood of East Boston, to design infrastructure that spans both municipal boundaries, because flood risk, doesn't care that we are separate municipalities. It is impacting both of us, and so we have to work together to address the problem as a single project. Before I move on, though, does anyone have any questions on that kind of first part of the presentation? Okay. Perfect.
So I had one question.
And I had a question. Go ahead, Gary, you go first.
The question was, in one of your earlier charts, you had the first line, and then you had the second line of different considerations. And I was very surprised to see on the second line, the protection of critical transportation infrastructure. Why that is on the second line and not a top line, I don't quite understand, because if it's really critical transportation infrastructure, then why isn't it a higher priority on that first line?
I wouldn't say that these are in any particular order. They're just kind of different considerations that we keep in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Pat, I had two questions for your overview.
Sure.
So currently, right now, we're trying to get all of the waterfront property owners downtown Nantucket to come before us and tell us what their plans are to adapt or deal with however they're going to deal with sea level rise, and how that works with our town CRP.
Mm-hmm.
And with the city of Boston, God, you guys got so many projects going on all over the place. How do you get all those projects? I guess one of my worries is that private entities may not, build if they're building a wall, it may not be built as high as what the municipality builds. How do you get everybody on the same page in unison, working so that, if you get gaps, then water's going to come in those places. But do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I absolutely do. That is definitely something that we are working on, and that is a challenge across the waterfront. We have, there are a few kind of points to this. Across the city, we internally try to strive for a 2070 design flood elevation for all of our city-led projects, and we encourage all of our partner agencies at the state and in the private sector to do the same. But because so much of the waterfront in Boston is privately owned, even if everyone is striving for that level of protection, if they redevelop, not all of these properties are going through a redevelopment at the same time. So that has the potential to leave, I kind of think of it as like crooked teeth. It's like, if they're not all at the same height, then water can kind of get through. We do have a few projects, though, on private property where we are working in partnership with private property owners to develop infrastructure that spans multiple private properties. So actually, can you see my mouse on the screen? Oh, you can. Okay, great. So over here in East Boston, you can see there's this big flood pathway that comes into the center of the neighborhood. This big orange stretch right here where we have an active project is actually entirely on privately owned property, and it spans 7 different property owners that vary in different lot sizes and types of uses. But we have stepped in as the city to build partnerships with those private property owners to figure out how do we work together as the city and as these private property owners to develop this infrastructure to provide that public benefit of preventing flooding so that we can build that in one go. To not allow for what you're saying of kind of having gaps in what is a very important area of the city's waterfront. Similarly, we have another project down here in what's called the 4-Point Channel that is a mix of public and private property that we're doing a similar effort of trying to build relationships with the property owners and do this together. I would say when we have these projects where we're kind of stepping in as the city and saying like we have to protect a large portion of the community and your property is the first line of defense for us to do that. It's a combination of trust building, but us also being able to bring the resources to the table to say like we'll pay essentially for the design work and the site investigations, for the permitting. Like we'll work with all of you to develop the strategy. It may require easements or things like that when it comes time for construction, but being able to kind of come forward and work with them, develop cost sharing if possible, and develop these things together is the approach that we're taking. That's for district scale projects though, where there are individual properties. We have something in our zoning code that I mentioned, I think during the earlier part of the presentation called our Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay District. And what this requires is any project or any projects over 20,000 square feet are subject to the city's development review process, which means they have to come into the city for like a rigorous, process to make sure that these projects that are either being retrofitted or are new construction are kind of embedding standards that we have for the different types of projects. And this overlay district for coastal resilience it identifies any projects of that size that fall within the 2070 projected floodplain. It essentially flags them as being like you need to integrate building level adaptation measures. And if you're on the waterfront, you also need to think about the redevelopment of the water's edge as well to contribute to that district scale solution. So that's been really useful for getting some of these larger waterfront property owners to help make the waterfront more resilient. There are a few examples on this map down here and over here and up here where that is actively underway. But the challenge with this overlay district is that it doesn't account for smaller properties, which are also on the waterfront. So that's kind of a gap that we're working towards. And that's where there are projects like this where we're stepping in. That was kind of a long-winded answer. Did I get to your question though?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. Also gave me some ideas. And then I had one other question. Given the new but current administration, what's the impact on you guys getting federal funding?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been challenging. We have kind of develop this process within our projects where for the initial phases of the projects for the site investigations and the preliminary design work, really any of the pre-construction work, the cost of doing that is enough that we can, or is low enough that we can either use city capital or state grants to be able to do that initial phase of work. But when it comes time for construction, obviously, like I'm sure these projects are very expensive, tens of millions of dollars, if not more. And that's where we have relied on federal funding to be able to kind of make that final push, with the exception of some of our completed projects that are on city-owned parks, where it's like we're already planning to do a big capital improvement so we can pay for a lot of that work ourselves. With the recent federal changes, though, specifically the elimination of the FEMA BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program, the city has lost $36 million in awarded funding for 2 major projects. One is off the screen down here in Dorchester, so further south, but also for Moakley Park, which is this big park in the center of Dorchester, where we had awarded funding. And then we had also submitted as part of this cycle a $50 million grant application for this project that I was mentioning earlier. So it's definitely impacting us in terms of our availability of funding. But we do have a few other projects that are funded by FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program that so far we're hearing are safe. But the changes in the funding availability at the federal level are definitely making us kind of rethink how we're going about these projects, whether it's that we're phasing them and building parts of them first, or are we seeking multiple grant sources for different components of the project, like looking for seawall repair in one grant or looking for ecological restoration or public amenities in another grant? Are we have like a grant matching fund as well in the city of Boston that was reserved for the event that we would get these big federal grants, because a lot of times those grants are a 75-25% cost share. So at any minute, if we get those grants, we need to have that 25% cost share available. And recognizing that some of these grants are no longer going to be options for us, we are thinking about, can we actually repurpose that grant matching fund to just be used essentially as capital to help pay for these projects instead of trying to go through the process, which can be very lengthy and kind of inefficient to get these grants. And I believe, at least I'm hopeful, that the state may be doing a similar view of their grant matching fund that I know they have available to municipalities across the Commonwealth. We're also thinking about other ways that we can implement funding mechanisms for this, whether it's a climate bank or I know the state's looking at like a revolving loan fund. We're also thinking about, business improvement districts and tax increment financing and things like that. But we also know that the timing that it takes to develop those things is long and won't necessarily get us the upfront capital that we need. So maybe more of a source for ongoing maintenance and things like that.
All right, great. Thank you very much for those answers.
Yeah.
And Leah, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks. Kat, I'm hoping that you can kind of explain how you've engaged with the Army Corps for that kind of third bucket and how explain that process, please.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I have a teammate who's leading that study, so if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to direct you to her. But the work with the Army Corps, we have essentially initiated this study with them, which is, my understanding is it's a common study that they've done with a lot of different municipalities around the country to do similar work. But Boston is in this unique case where we've done a lot of coastal resilience planning already, whereas a lot of the municipalities that the Army Corps has worked with in the past, that is essentially their first foray into coastal resilience work. And so they're kind of starting from ground zero. But with us, we've done a lot of work. So they're basically looking back at the work that we've done through Climate Ready Boston. They have created their own flood risk model that has actually been surprisingly identical to the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. So that is just a plug for just how lucky we are in Massachusetts to have really good forward-looking data to see that even the Army Corps' work is matching very closely with the model that we use here. And then they are doing their own assessment of different alignment options for this flood protection or for the flood protection options that we have across the waterfront, which can feel a little bit duplicative to the work that we've already done, but it's good to have them kind of gut check the work that we've already completed and make their own recommendations that largely have been matching with ours. But there are a few points of where they're kind of reconsidering certain options that at times we had taken off the table for various reasons. So I would say overall, our work with the Corps has been really positive. The New England District is great, and they are feeling pretty confident that the Army Corps is a traditionally bipartisan department of the federal government, and that they will be able to continue working with us on this. Overall, I would say the Corps is making strides towards developing coastal resilient infrastructure that isn't just a seawall, but in a lot of cases that is their recommendation. And that's maybe where the only point of coordination kind of continues to say that like we have these desires to make our waterfront look a certain way in addition to act a certain way. And so there may be a breakdown between what parts of the project the Corps might be able to pay for and lead the charge on versus what parts we might be responsible in terms of kind of like the cosmetic features, if you will, for lack of a better word, the landscaping, the restoration work, the greenery, the public access, the site furnishings, things like that. So maybe kind of like breaking down the structural pieces from the public realm pieces a bit. So generally it's been positive, but definitely an interesting process to work through, having done so much work already. Gary.
Peter, I had one more question.
Peter, you're on mute.
Go
Peter?
ahead, Gary.
Kat, I had one more question, and that is, do the current regulations in force permit people who have waterfront property to build on areas that are subject to extreme flood risk in the future? One of the issues we have here in Nantucket is trying to get the regulations updated because the real estate is so important to our economy. What's the situation in Boston?
Yeah, do you mean like local regulations in our zoning code? or-
Yes.
Yeah, so that's where that coastal overlay district comes into play to really drive how waterfront property owners are able to develop. Because if they are going to develop in parts of the waterfront that we know are at risk, but maybe aren't experiencing such repetitive losses that we can say don't build there anymore, we want to make sure that they're not putting new buildings and, of course, people in a place that would be in harm's way. So a lot of what this overlay district looks at is things like, how are you elevating your site? Where are you putting your mechanical equipment within the building so that you're not at risk of that equipment being flooded out if it's in like the basement or lower floors? Where are the living floors within the building? You know, try and make sure that we're not putting anybody in a basement unit or even in first floor units where they may be particularly at risk. So there's a lot of requirements within the zoning code that we have that shape how buildings can be developed so that they're not increasing that risk, and that they're also being aware of how are they managing water on their site. So things like storage and green infrastructure, improving drainage and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily get, like, not every single redevelopment is getting at the broader district scale flood protection, but at least at the site level. And that's not just waterfront, that's anyone that's in the future floodplain is being required to think about these measures in the design of their building from the very get-go.
Great, thank you.
I'd say that's one of our more powerful tools in the city of Boston, and it's not something that we've seen in a lot of other municipalities. So we're very fortunate to kind of be leading the way with that local zoning law.
All right, thanks, Gary, and thanks, Kat. I'm going to go with Vince, and then we'll save the rest of the questions for the end because she has more of her presentation. So
Thank you.
Vince, go ahead and don't take too long.
I won't. And thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kat. This has been marvelous. So just getting to the zoning issues, has there been any conversation about hardscaping? One of the issues we see here is where there's lots are being maximized for coverage and hardscaping for parking areas and various other things like that, which increases runoff. Are you guys looking at any zoning or any kind of building code regs for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within the overlay district, it is very much focused on that coastal resilience piece, but we do also have, as part of the development review process, there's something called a resilience checklist that has actually been in place for way longer than we had the zoning overlay. The zoning overlay was formally adopted in 2021. I think the resilience checklist has been in place since like 2018, if I'm remembering correctly. And this does take into account precipitation-based flooding and how people are holding water on site and how much impervious surface they are adding to the site. Ideally, it's not adding significantly more. But there's also, we have an Office of Green Infrastructure that formed about 3 years ago now, and they have worked, they're situated within our Public Works Department, and that is also in the same cabinet as our Transportation Department, and they have developed policies within public right-of-ways to address depaving in our streets and our sidewalks, adding tree pits and things like that that actually hold water instead of just kind of being like compacted soil. So there's been a really big push to add green infrastructure throughout the city to depave, manage water from precipitation, and really flag areas of the city that we're already seeing flooding in. So happy to send you information about the right-of-way policies that they're working on. Our green infrastructure team is amazing.
Great, thank you, Kat.
Every little bit counts, you know.
Okay.
All right, I will do my
Go
best
ahead.
to go quickly through the Bennington Street piece.
Okay.
All right. So the project team for this project, like I mentioned, it's a unique situation where it is the City of Boston partnering with the City of Revere for this project, but we are also working with an awesome consultant team from VHB as the lead engineering firm, as well as Terra Inc. as our landscape architecture firm. We also, and I'll explain this a bit, this project is situated very close to the Belle Isle Marsh, which is one of the last remaining salt marshes in the city of Boston that's owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So they're also, they have staff that attend our weekly meetings and are kind of part of our project team. And this project has been made possible through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program from the state for 2 cycles of funding, which I'll talk about in a bit. So this project is in East Boston and Revere. It we kind of break it down into 3 different areas. There's Bennington Street itself, which runs down the middle of the screen that you're seeing here on the left. It is nested in between the Belle Isle Marsh, which I mentioned is the last or one of the last remaining salt marshes in the city and an area of critical environmental concern. There's a lot of endangered species that live there, but it's also a very beautiful reservation for people to enjoy. And Bennington Street is the dividing line between the Belle Isle Marsh and the MBTA Blue Line train tracks and Suffolk Downs Station. Just across the border of Revere, we have Fredericks Park here to the right, which is a park owned by the city of Revere. It serves, it's kind of, you kind of can't see it very well under the overlay here, but it serves a K-8 public school in Revere. And then in addition to these 2 areas that are owned by City of Boston and City of Revere, there's also a privately owned property nested right in the middle of the project area that it belongs to a Veterans of Foreign Wars facility. So we kind of break it down into these 3 segments. We refer to the project as Bennington Street and Fredericks Park, since those are the parts of the project area that the city owns. But we are essentially experiencing flooding in this area today pretty substantially. And so we are working on developing infrastructure that moves down Bennington Street and wraps around the perimeter of the park, because where flooding is originating is really coming through the Belle Isle Marsh and overtopping the roadway and the park. And this is going to get worse over time. This is also a really complicated project, as pretty much all coastal resilience projects are, because there are just so many different stakeholders that are involved in this work. On the Boston side of Bennington Street, the City of Boston owns the road, but the second that you cross into Revere, the road is actually owned by MassDOT, or the Mass Department of Transportation. So they are also a stakeholder in this project. DCR owns the Belle Isle Marsh. The MBTA, of course, owns the train station track, or the train station, the tracks, and this parking lot. Revere owns Fredericks Park. And then we have both the VFW over here and some private property owners down here. So there's really a wide range of different stakeholders, from different cities to different state agencies to private property owners, that we've been engaging with on this project since we kicked it off a couple of years ago. The existing conditions on Bennington Street are a little bit bleak. It's a very wide road. It's 2 lanes of travel in each direction with parking lanes on either side. This road has been studied by our transportation department and MassDOT and has been shown to be a very eligible candidate for a road diet. So through our resilience project, we're also looking at actually depaving about 23 feet off of this roadway per recommendations by our transportation department and the state to actually bring this road into a more narrow configuration to slow traffic speeds, but also make this area more friendly to pedestrians, especially those who are trying to get from the Blue Line over to the Belle Isle Marsh. Over in Fredericks Park, this is a rather underutilized sports field. It floods regularly, and the field is unfortunately unusable for a large portion of the year because the ground is so saturated most of the time. So Revere as a city is growing really quickly, and they have a lack of sufficient open space to support all of their youth sports activities and things like that. So this is a really critical space for them to upgrade and improve and make usable for their students. And so the risk of flooding, of course, is posing a threat to their ability to use this space for the kids. So these are some pictures at the top here are some pictures from 2022 when we had a nor'easter that had flooding go into Bennington Street as well as into the Beachmont Schools parking lot, the Veterans of Foreign Wars parking lot. But even more recently than that, we in 2024, this is a video showing just the extent of flooding over Bennington Street. You can see water coming over from the Belle Isle Marsh over the roadway, which I should have noted is one of 2 evacuation corridors that serves the neighborhood of East Boston and Winthrop and Revere. You can see that cars were not able to pass through this roadway and were being diverted, and water is pouring over the roadway into this back area behind the MBTA tracks, which you can see are right here. So this is just a video that is very clear evidence for the need for this project. And based on findings from the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, this risk is only going to get worse over time. This image on the right is just showing that even within very frequent storm events in 2070, we are at about 100% chance of inundation in this area if we don't take action. And like I said, this road is really important. The MBTA Blue Line, of course, is very important. And then the school and the school's open space is very important. So we're working on trying to protect all of these different assets. Our main goals of this project are to reduce coastal flood risk, to protect East Boston and Revere from near and long-term impacts of sea level rise and coastal storms out to 2070. We are also looking at how do we support the health and preservation of Belle Isle Marsh through any restoration work and through adding more open space along Bennington Street with that road diet that I mentioned to try to give the marsh some more space. So also looking at supporting co-benefits along Bennington Street, including any green infrastructure, tree canopy, and active or multimodal transportation, such as bike lanes. And then within Fredericks Park, in addition to improving coastal resilience, we're also looking at how do we better manage stormwater and how do we enhance recreational amenities and ecological habitat along the marsh on that side. This project really kicked off in September of 2023 after we received our first MVP grant from the state to study different strategies for Bennington Street and Fredericks Park. We had done a lot of planning, of course, before this through the coastal resilience plans for East Boston, and Revere had taken a look at their risk through their MVP planning process. But it was really through some subsequent studies that we were doing as part of an analysis of Belle Isle Marsh itself that we identified this area as a critical need that required collaboration between the municipalities. So we sought that MVP grant jointly to lead this project together. We brought VHB on to the project team in November of 2023, and what we've done to date, or what we did with them at that point in time, included technical site investigations of the area, stakeholder engagement, and then ultimately an alternatives analysis, which I'll explain in a second why that was what we ended up doing. So we released this alternatives analysis in June of 2024, and it looked at about 20 different options for resilient strategies that we could take throughout the area. This was largely driven by the location of the project next to a salt marsh, which if anyone here is familiar with wetlands permitting, you know that it is a beast to do any work near a salt marsh. And so while we had some original ideas for what we wanted to do in terms of best options for coastal resilience in this area, we were driven to do this alternatives analysis specifically for this project to be able to show what was really the best option based on permitting and feasibility and impacts to wetland resource areas. That then led to our second phase of the project, which we started in we started in the fall of last year. We received our second MVP grant from the state in July of last year to move forward into schematic design, which we are working on right now. So we are swiftly approaching our MVP deliverable in June of this year, and are working towards taking the alternative that was recommended in our previous phase through about 50% schematic design. And then beyond that, we'll be moving into phase 3, which will be our final design and permitting phase for the project. So as I mentioned, permitting near salt marsh is really, really complicated. So we have a lot of different wetland resource areas in the vicinity of this project area, including salt marsh, bordering vegetated wetland, land subject to coastal storm flowage, a 100-foot buffer. And of course, on top of all of that, it is an area of critical environmental concern. So we looked at so many different options to figure out, what can we do to offer the best project, the most effective project, but also reduce those impacts to any resource areas fees as best as possible. And so, like I said, that really drove the first phase of our project, culminating in a alternatives analysis rather than in another level of design. But as we've been moving into design, these are just some section drawings that visually kind of depict the different options that we're considering, and I can share a little bit as to why we landed on the recommended options that we did. So for Bennington Street, there's the existing condition in the upper left, and you can see that it's the magenta area down here in the project area. We looked at a lot of different options for Bennington Street, from elevating the roadway to adding a berm on the marsh side of the roadway to doing a retaining wall with a berm on the marsh side of the roadway. We also looked at just vertical flood walls, either on the marsh side of the roadway or the inland side of the roadway. We looked at so many different options and configurations, and ultimately elevating the roadway proved to be the best option in terms of long-term flood risk, stormwater management, impacts to the marsh itself in terms of the resource areas that are on the marsh side of Bennington Street. And also thinking about access in and out of the marsh reservation itself. I'm happy to go into a bit more detail on that if it's helpful, but we are ultimately pursuing a road elevation similarly to the project that I saw Leah present at the Stone Living Lab conference. Down by the Beachmont VFW, we also looked at a lot of different areas. You can see in the existing condition that there's really not much space between the existing parking lot at this property and the marsh. I think it's about 50 feet, and it's a salt marsh resource area. So we looked at different options for seawalls, whether that's a sheet pile wall or a concrete retaining wall that we could sort of adapt over time as kind of the smallest footprints. But this area is very low elevation, so we would need to gain about 8 feet, and nobody really wants to have an 8-foot wall outside of their property. So our preferred option there was to actually build a berm or a living levee and work with the property owners or work with the property owner at the VFW to remove some of their parking from their parking lot and do essentially a land swap with the city of Revere to move their parking to a different area so that we can have a bit more space to build a more nature-based feature that doesn't result in an 8-foot wall and provides some more ecological benefits to the space along the marsh. And then last, within Fredericks Park, the options that we had were mostly looking at, do we build a berm along the edge of the park, or do we elevate the entire park? We also looked, of course, at similarly seawalls and flood walls, and those were not preferable for many, many reasons. And ultimately, our preferred recommendation was to look at elevating the entire park to really preserve the park for long-term flood risk reduction, as well as to really maximize the space within the park that could be usable for the kids. This is a model that our consultant team made that shows, it's a flow path analysis. So this shows without the project where the water is coming into the project area. So you're really seeing that water moves through Fredericks Park, as well as through the VFW parking lot and around Bennington Street, and then up into other areas further north. And so with the project, with any of these alternatives, we wanted to make sure that this was going to reduce flood risk. So what you're seeing here now on the right is with the project, what is that flood risk reduction? The remaining flood risk that you're seeing is actually coming from the north, because this is also a complicated area in that we have to do projects in other parts of both Boston and Revere to truly address the risk coming from multiple locations. So the point of this graphic is to show that with this project, we will be substantially reducing long-term flood risk. And the residual flood risk that we'll be seeing coming through this area will be largely coming from outside of the project area. So we know that this project will have a significant benefit for the region. And then last, in terms of next steps, there's a lot of permitting ahead of us, as I'm sure you are all familiar. We will need a lot of local and state and also some federal permits for this project. So once we're through the schematic design phase, that's really where we're headed next, is to begin that permitting process through all of these different layers of permitting that we have in Massachusetts and at our local level. So likely this project will hopefully be in the ground in a couple of years, but these permits can take a long time. So we are ready to go, I guess, hopefully soon to get this going. I'm going to wrap up there because I know it's been almost an hour, but are there any questions about this project in particular?
Thank you very much, Kat. It's very, very, very informative for us. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Kat. Can you dive a little deeper on your engagement, like outreach? And I know there's a ton of stakeholders and project partners within this project. So if you can kind of talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. A lot of the engagement with the other landowners in the area, and as well as with community partners. I didn't get into this in too much detail, but as I mentioned, we had this study of Belle Isle Marsh that we were part of with a nonprofit and with the state, and this really led to the creation of a stakeholder collaborative that every month, after almost, I think, 4 years, we're going on 4 years, we meet with these different state agencies, as well as Woods Hole Group and Friends of Belle Isle Marsh, which is a local stewardship group, the Mystic River Watershed Association, and others, to come together every single month to work on, what are we doing around Belle Isle Marsh? And so that has really been the avenue for us to have engagement with these different stakeholders. We collectively looked at all of the flood risk in the area back in 2021 and jointly prioritized different projects around Belle Isle Marsh that we knew would have the greatest benefit and to flood risk reduction, but also to potential opportunities to restore Belle Isle Marsh. And so Bennington Street and Fredericks Park, and then a project over in the town of Winthrop, which also abuts the marsh, were kind of elevated by all of these different stakeholders as really important projects to move forward. So that's just to say that there was a lot of support from these different groups from the onset, because we collectively identified that this was one of the top priority projects in this part of the, well, not the city, of all 3 cities and different state agencies. In terms of engagement with the community more broadly, though, over the course of the project, we've had a number of different engagements. We've had virtual public meetings specific to this project, but we've also done a couple of public information sessions where we've shared about all of the different work that's been happening in this area. We had a really great meeting actually back in early March where we had presentations from City of Boston, City of Revere, DCR, MBTA, Friends of Belle Isle Marsh, Mystic River Watershed Association, a whole slew of different folks presenting about how these different projects are happening and talking to each other to make sure that people publicly knew that this is not just, these projects are not happening in silos. We've also tabled at different community events, such as festivals within the Belle Isle Marsh. We've had individual conversations with the VFW, and the City of Revere is working on meeting with each individual private property owner behind Fredericks Park right now to make sure that they're aware of this project and understand where there may be impacts to their properties to keep them safe as well.
Thanks so much. And then I have a follow-up question. Is that okay, Peter?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. Do you have a cost estimate for this project? And when it comes to funding the construction, how does that work with, 2 to 3 different towns?
Great question. We do have preliminary cost estimates, but the project design has been shifting a bit, of course, since we did those preliminary cost estimates as part of the feasibility assessment and alternatives analysis. So we're estimating that it is likely about $55 million to do this project. And that's including the road elevation, the road diet, the park elevation, buried seawalls along the roadway that we've added into the design per recommendations from the Army Corps, and the public realm improvements as well. So it's definitely not an inexpensive project, but in terms of within that whole project area, it definitely varies by what parts of this are associated with the park versus the roadway, and we can kind of break it down a little bit within each municipality. In terms of funding, we are not ruling federal grants off the table. Things like PROTECT through the U.S. Department of Transportation would make a lot of sense for this, since it is protecting a city and state roadway as well as critical transportation infrastructure. But we have actually submitted the project through Mass DOT's Project Review Commission or Committee to hopefully help or to hopefully work with MassDOT to finalize the design and potentially have them help us use discretionary funds for construction, since this would benefit their roadway as well and the MBTA. So we're looking at different options, but I would anticipate that if we're lucky, some of it will be state funded, maybe federal funded, but at least for the parts of the project area that are owned by Revere and Boston, capital funding is also a potential option.
Thank you, Kat. Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks, Peter. Kat, great job. I had comment and a question. Comment was just I applaud any coastal resilience planning efforts that do more than just try to prevent disaster, but also end up hopefully making the area more livable and beautiful. And I noted your comment about how bleak some of this landscape is today, like the Bennington Street area and whatnot. And so the fact that you're trying to improve it as you also defend against the worst case scenarios is really heartening. And I think that's the kind of thing that we ought to be absolutely focused on in Nantucket. The question was, and I've asked this question before of other folks in with similar presentations, is to me the open mystery in thinking about how to address the flood risks is groundwater. And if you take all the steps you need to do to prevent flooding from either storms or from sea level, you may solve one problem, but have you actually cured the broader issue, which is that groundwater is also rising as sea level is rising? So just curious, I understand with the Franklin Park thing, you were, I think, wise in planning to actually elevate the entire playing field, because that might help address that. But how about the MBTA and all the parts behind Bennington Street? Are those at risk? Even if you do this project, are they not at risk from groundwater?
Great question. I wish I could say I was an expert on groundwater flooding, but I'm definitely not. But I know our team from VHB, they're coastal coastal or water resources engineers, and so they're taking into account the impacts of groundwater flooding. So, for example, within Fredericks Park, the intent is actually to build it about a foot higher than where it actually needs to be, because we're planning for subsidence in the park from the land sinking and from the impacts of groundwater discharge and things like that. That we've already seen, like, a significant amount of subsidence, to the point where Revere has actually had to build steps at the lowest level leading into the building because the ground has been sinking underneath it. So that's being accounted for. We're also looking at things like culvert repairs underneath where the Belle Isle Marsh goes underneath the roadway and discharges back out here into what's called Sales Creek. And then when working with the MBTA, we are really focused on how are we keeping water out from the ocean and overtopping Bennington Street and reaching the MBTA parking lot. But we're also talking to them about, like, how can you better manage stormwater within your parking lot so that when it rains, you're not having an exacerbated flood risk within the train tracks and within the parking lot itself. So I guess all of that is to say that we are factoring in groundwater, but I can certainly put you in touch with our engineering team if you want a little bit more detail as to how.
Thank you, Kat. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
Oh, actually, I should have noted that part of why we went with a road elevation as opposed to a berm or a retaining wall or a seawall on the marsh side was because of stormwater impacts and the potential need to then pump water over that raised structure. Whereas elevating the roadway itself would just allow for the water to run off as it already does today. That, and thinking about, again, impacts into the Belle Isle Marsh, where there's a parking lot down in here for people to get to. You would have to essentially go over a hump if you were to build that infrastructure, or have a gate that would be deployed. And we really try to avoid any deployable gates or things like that wherever possible with our long-term passive solutions like this. And sorry,
Okay.
Is there any more questions?
No, it's all right. Are there any more questions or comments from the committee? Go ahead, Leah.
Sorry, one more. So you said that for all of your coastal resilience projects, your planning horizon is 2070. Is that for, like, high tide flooding in 2070, or is that for a certain yearly or exceedance storm?
Yeah,
for
it's
2070?
Yeah, we're looking for a 1% annual chance flood with 2070 sea level rise projections is kind of how we base that. That's our target. There are a few instances where we are going to like a 2050 level in a few places where, where we know, say, this parks project is likely going to have another capital improvement within a 30-year cycle. So that additional elevation will happen at a later date, or the elevation is so low today that it would be just such a stark increase in elevation to go from where we are today to where we would need to be in 2070. And there might be opportunities to adapt that over time. So there are a few places within our various projects where we are going a little lower than that, but we always try to start our projects with the intent to go to that long-term flood protection, so that if we then identify that that's not going to be feasible, or that's not going to be cost effective, or that's going to be so disruptive to the public realm that it just doesn't make sense at this time, then we can start factoring in adaptability over the long term. And I am very sorry. I do actually need to get going to a project team meeting for this project. So if there are any final questions, I'm happy to take them, but then I do need to leave.
Okay, guys, are we all set?
Amazing.
Okay,
Well,
great.
Leah has my email address, so feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to put you in touch with other members of the project team to, expand on anything that I couldn't fully answer. I appreciate your time, and I hope to learn more about the work that you guys are doing in Nantucket, and I also hope to get out to visit Nantucket because it's been many years since I've been there. So thank you for all that you're doing and for having me today.
Okay, Leah, did you have something else?
No, I don't know how to take this down. Thank you so much, Kat. That was great.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Of course. Thank you all.
Okay, bye. Well, she's gone, but are there any comments from the public on this presentation? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 6, final input on the coastal resilience section of the harbor plan, or I should say it properly, the Nantucket and Mattocket Harbors Action Plan update. And I'm the CRAC representative on that committee. I can report to you that yesterday at our meeting, we finished reviewing the plan as it is internally. And we are looking to have a meeting in for the public for their comments sometime in the second week of July. But this item on the agenda is for us, for you guys to make your last comments. So what I'm going to do is go through what you have in your packets and then ask for questions. I'm going to read each goal and objective. And then when I get to the recommendation, I'll read the recommendation and you can go ahead and comment or not. When we're done, we'll ask for comments from the public. Okay. 2.7 coastal resilience. Goal 1, minimize and prepare for the impacts of climate change, specifically sea level rise and coastal flooding within the harbor planning area. Objective 1, support the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee in the implementation of the Coastal Resilience Plan. And then the first recommendation is convene regular intercommittee department meetings to coordinate coastal resilience efforts and share objectives, challenges, and project prioritizations. Does any of our committee members have comments that they want to read or say into the record? Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. I'm just curious about this. So when you say that the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee support us in the implementation of the plan, we're not actually the people who are implementing the plan.
That's correct. But
right?
there is a coastal resilience element that can't be ignored in the harbor plan. And so it's
Right.
being included. And so there are recommendations to make our efforts relevant in the plan going forward.
So maybe would be the thing to say. right? Like to add in and support the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's recommendations in the implementation of the plan. Because isn't it the Natural Resources Department that implements the plan? It's not us.
Actually, it's not the Natural Resources Department. There will be an implementation committee made up of lots of groups. There'll be a representative from CRAC, from SHAB. So it's administered by the Natural Resources Department. Jeff Carlson attends our meetings, but it's not put into place by them.
So then I would just make the recommendation that we add the word recommendations into the sentence.
Can I make a recommendation?
Sure.
So for the objective 1, Joanna's right. It does say that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee implements the Coastal Resilience Plan, which is not accurate. It would be
Okay.
support the Natural Resources Department in implementation of the Coastal Resilience Plan.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments?
And if you want to add CRAC, you can add like, your CRAC's recommendations or
Okay.
however you want to word it.
Everything we're saying will be viewed by Kim Starbuck, who's heading up Urban Harbors Institute and writing the plan for us. So speak at will. She's going to get this video. She's going to input it into the plan and make the changes, and then our committee will have the final review. So all of this is great. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. My comment or question is kind of throughout the document, but I guess I wanted to start here. I was curious about the responsible parties piece because I was trying to figure out what the common denominator is. So like a lot of these in this first one are town entities, but the Land and Water Council isn't a town entity. And so I was just curious how, like, in terms of input for what the responsible parties are, how were those determined? Were they self-selected for each of the different recommendations, or were those selected by the committee?
Selected by the committee, by Urban Harbors, by Natural Resources. So we don't select any private nonprofits. We might look to them, but it's for the town to implement the plan, it's not to say that we're not going to take input from the private nonprofits, because we've got one of our members is Emily Molden from the Nantucket Land and Water Council. So of course we're going to take the input, but in terms of implementing the plan, that's for the town to do.
Okay, so my question follow-up based on your response is that there are many different nonprofits listed in some of the other responsible parties. So that's where, I guess, but we can wait till you come to those. I'm just curious about that.
Okay, I may have spoken out of turn, but what I said about, say what you got to say, and Kim will take it and put it the way it should be, and then we'll review it and make it right. So, okay.
Peter,
Are there any other?
Peter, one comment on.
Hold on. Rachel had her hand up, and then I'll get to you, Gary. You have to put your hand up. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I guess, it's interesting when Sarah brought that up. I guess my question would be, are the responsible parties lists in general suggestions, or, are they going to become sort of formalized, indications of who should be involved? And if they're going to be part of the implementation process, and those are the people that are going to be reached out to, then I think, I think the question for me would be, should the land bank be on here? But just sort of thinking that through, these lists through might become more important depending on if we understand how they're used. And maybe that's a bigger picture discussion, Peter, but it just occurred to me. So thank you.
No, it's okay. Having gone through the implementation of the current plan, or part of it anyway, as I was creating the blue pages, the implementation committee basically just taps the people who are going to, the entity that are going to implement the recommendations. So they may be nonprofits. So, all right, go ahead, Gary, and then I'll go to Doug.
I would just change the word, instead of responsible parties, I would use the word participating parties. Because you say responsible, somebody can say, well, who's responsible for what portion of this? basically, that's what the committee's going to decide. So I would call this, instead of responsible parties, I just say participating parties.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Go ahead, Doug.
Very much in the same spirit of Gary's comment, I was going to make the same sort of suggestion. You could potentially say participating parties, and then in parens just indicate will vary based on project, because the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board's not going to be involved in every CRP initiative. And I can make the same comment about every one of these people on the list. It's just these are the list of people who will be consulted and will to some degree participate based on the individual project. Thanks. Oh, and I don't think there is a town administration department. You could just strike the word department. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. All right. And
Peter,
Leah?
I don't have my virtual hand because I'm sharing the screen, but can I make a recommendation that under the responsible parties, if you think an organization is missing, why don't we add them here? And then the committee can, the harbor, or our urban harbors can decide, if it should be nixed or not. But since we're having the discussion, this is our last chance for input. Why don't we input that?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Sort of to Leah's comment too, part of my asking that when I was reading this over the weekend was thinking about what the definition of the responsible parties are. So the organization I work for, which I am not representing here, I'm an at-large member on the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, but we do a lot of this work in terms of the community-based science, which is recommendation 2, the education and outreach, recommendation 3, all this stuff. But I don't want to put us on the list if there is some like to say that we're responsible. So that's where I wanted some of the definition. And then, for example, other organizations that are on here, I'm curious about the why and what the percentage is, because of maybe they're not the best organization to represent that particular topic. So I'm looking at it on my other screen further down. I know we're still on topic 1, but I think whether or not I put another organization on there, whether it's mine or I recommend a different organization or entity, I want to know what I'm volunteering someone for. Is it just to be considered? Is it to be on that list? Because we could be very exhaustive. Or if it's these are organizations that have already kind of raised their hand and said, I agree to be responsible. So that's where I hesitate, but I also want to make sure we're not missing from something.
Okay.
So if there's a definition, I guess, or what's the responsible party?
Just know that as the Harbor Plan Committee, we have spent hours and hours making this the way it is. And the responsible parties, and the word responsible is chosen because these are the parties that fit this recommendation that we believe will be best suited to implement that recommendation. If there are others that need to be added to help out, definitely. But these are the ones that we all felt needed it. Also need to know that we've wordsmithed the hell out of the document. And so I may get some blowback for comments about, well, we don't like responsible, we want participating. We're a bunch of hair splitters on that committee. So the suggestions are all taken, they're valid, and then what'll happen is what'll happen at the committee and with Urban Harbors. Who else? Leah, you had a hand up?
Yeah, I just yelled across the wall to Jeff, but I was asking him about the responsible party section, and he said he's working with our Urban Harbors to refine that list. So if you think that a party should be added, then add it now, and then that'll get refined during the implementation part. So it doesn't necessarily mean for example, Sarah, if you want to add Linda Loring to this, it doesn't mean that Linda Loring would be the primary organization implementing it, if that's your question.
What it means is that when the implementation committee gets going, these responsible parties will be contacted and tasked with implementing the recommendation. To what level each one rises to the top to do all of the work, we don't know yet, but we're putting them here so So the implementation committee knows what are the best entities to put this recommendation through. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks for this discussion, Sarah, and bringing it up. And just looking over particularly this recommendation number 1, that's the coordination of coastal resilience efforts. I would be remiss in not saying that, you know, the organization that I represent on this committee shouldn't be listed on here just because we're a majority property owner within both of the harbors. I would say we probably are the majority property owner as an individual property owner. So listing the Nantucket Conservation Foundation would make sense considering our goals and objectives. And then I'd also say, and not to volunteer Rachel for anything, but I would think that the land bank would need to be on here as well, given their considerable projects within the harbor. You know, there's representation for private property owners, you know, individual small private property owners, but those of us that could actually implement larger scale projects should probably be on this list.
Okay. Do we have any more additions to this responsible parties list for recommendation 1?
I have a question, because a lot of this could use like community support too. And so I was wondering for responsible parties, I noticed that there weren't any like, just, you know, the community at large. Is there a reasoning for that?
Community at large. You mean the general public?
Yeah.
So the meetings are open to the public. So when the meetings are happening, people can come and contribute as each recommendation is worked on. So I don't think we can physically I mean,
I'm just thinking for like specific coastal resilience projects within the downtown, we need to work with private properties to
Right.
make sure that, you know, it's town efforts, private property efforts are coordinated. And so
Right.
for this one, I think it would be good to add in, you know, specific private property owners within the project area.
so do you want under responsible parties to list every single private property owner or every single area that's that's vulnerable?
I don't
That's-
think you,
That's kind of what you're
no,
saying.
I would, no,
No. So, you know, maybe just putting in public input or general public or, you know,
yeah, public participation,
um,
input, I don't know.
I don't know.
The committee can, yeah, figure that
We'll
out.
figure it out. Okay, any other comments? Any other additions to recommendation 1? Okay, hearing none. Recommendation 2, implement the town's coastal resilience plan and future CRP updates. Follow the prioritization timeline of the town's coastal resilience plan and future CRP updates while acknowledging the CRP as a living document, adapting to accommodate future changing climate conditions and reducing risk. Ensure that the goals of the CRP future updates are aligned with inform other planning efforts. Additionally, consider shellfish components while implementing coastal resilience projects. Do we have comments? Okay. Recommendation 3, address known data and planning gaps, including but not limited to a groundwater and sea level rise monitoring study, a stormwater management plan, a numeric modeling study of Code 2 breaching, a future wetlands migration study, an updated analysis of vulnerable public access sites, and a survey of harbor coastlines for existing and future erosion and flood protections. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. I'm gonna say again to add the Nantucket Conservation Foundation on here, as there are some of these studies we're already involved in, so being part of the conversation would make sense.
Okay, and Rachel, do you want the land bank to be added to this as well?
You know,
They're on there, Peter.
Oh, okay, yes, they are. Yep.
yeah, we are. It's interesting though, we're more of an implementation group than a research group. So it's sort of, you know, it's interesting. I'm not opposed to being involved. But thank you.
But most likely with all the responsible parties, these are people that are going to be reached out to.
So yes, in that case, we would love to be reached out to for many of these things.
Okay, and Sarah, do you want Linda Loring on there?
I would say yes, but I would ask first if it's appropriate. I mean, I know that I had proposed that the Long Pond watershed be included as part of the Mattocket Harbor section, and that was denied. So we're interested in looking in that area. So, I mean, it might be a fringe interest, but we do all those things just in more of the Long Pond watershed portion of Mattocket.
Well, I agree with you, and I think you should be on there. And there was a guy, Bruce Mandel, that came from one of the Mattocket homeowners associations, trying to get us to extend the study area all the way to Hummock Pond, and we were trying to rein it in, saying, "Look, we're just looking for the coastline as best we can. We can't include the entire island." But me personally, sea level rise, we don't know how far exactly the water is going to go up, and there's a potential for the water to come in the Mattocket ditch and breach down at the other end of Long Pond and raise the water level and bring it all the way up to your deck. That could happen. So you should have a say.
Well, in fairness, not that I think that's going to happen, but the fact that Mattocket is connected to Long Pond, I think just makes it part of the same waterway. So sure, I'm happy to be on it if it's
Okay.
appropriate.
All right. Go ahead, Matt.
Should the sand transport be referenced here, or are you guys assuming it's going to be completed?
It's already been completed.
Okay, is it island wide or the harbor only?
The harbor only.
Okay. Does the remainder have any impact on the harbors? And should it be listed or no?
Does the what?
Does the remaining island wide have an impact on the harbor entrances or anything? Should that be completed or no?
Well, is Vince still on the call? Vince,
Yeah.
you there?
Yes, he is.
Somebody, Leah, run over there and shake Vince, or is he on a call?
Oh, wake him up, will you?
Vince
Hey,
is gonna
Vince.
pop. He's gonna pop on. One sec. While he's coming on, I'm wondering if the trustees of reservation should be added to responsible parties.
Yeah, good one. Yep, I agree.
Apologies.
Did you hear all that, Vince?
No, I did not. I was next
Okay,
door.
so Matt Fee asked about the sediment transport study and dredging plan, and asked if it was island wide, and I said it was just for the harbor, and he was asking, will it be island wide? And you're the man to answer that.
And should it be listed in this, on the things that are needed?
Under responsible parties.
Yes, essentially, yes. So this is a tiny bit complicated. It's hard to submit what isn't a complete plan. So the sediment transport study does go into all harbors, Nantucket Harbor, Pulpus Harbor, and Mattocket Harbor. It's not complete. It'll be about another year before it's complete. We just
Okay, I was wrong.
extended- Pardon?
I said I was wrong. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. This only just happened at Select Board a couple of weeks ago, where we extended the deadline. It was a $0 contract extension out to the 31st of March, 2026. So as it turns out, undertaking sediment transport studies and undertaking dredge planning is really super complicated. The sediment transport part itself is unmercifully complicated. I always said it was even more complicated than I realized. And then turning that from the model into the recommendations for where we're going to dredge, that's going to be difficult. And we've now started on the permitting phases. I was chatting to some people internally about it 10 days ago, thereabouts, and we're talking like 6 to 9 months minimum of permitting, probably closer to the 12. That's a lot of the reason for the contract extension. So yes, it should get a mention under here, but I would caveat it for when active. So that, you know, we're not putting in something that is not yet complete.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Do you have any more additions to recommendation 3? Okay, recommendation 4, work with environmental justice communities and other underrepresented communities to address their needs and interests related to coastal resilience, ecological restoration, relocation, and climate disruptions. Communicate information in multiple adaptive formats, e.g. video, audio, for non-English readers and speakers. Ensure that an environmental justice community representative is on the Harbor Plan Implementation Committee, and that the harbor-related decisions and forums are communicated to the environmental justice communities. Leah?
I should mention that what I'm sharing has my edits within it as well. So that's what the blue is that you're seeing. So I would add the communications office. Vince, I know that you're working on a work group, right?
Again, another thing in development, if through the chair, if I'm allowed.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is only at the very embryonic stages. At the 2023, so no, pardon, 2024 annual town meeting, Natural Resources Department got funds under Article 10 to undertake an environmental justice plan for Nantucket. It was in development for the last year, getting a scope, putting out all of that information. Finally got it advertised about 5 weeks ago, and it closed on Friday. So I've only just received the RFPs. We won't even be awarding a contract for a while. One of the outputs of the project it'll be a 12-month project, but one of the outputs is to have an environmental justice committee. We don't know the form of it just yet, but it'll be something like another advisory committee or some ad hoc type committee. No idea. Haven't gone through the process of developing it or looking at how it should work, but just putting it out there that this is another thing in development, then that if you do put it in, caveat when active.
Okay, thank you, Vince. All right, do we have any more comments for recommendation 4? Okay. Recommendation 5, the Harbor Plan Implementation Committee should include a member of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Okay, you don't have to volunteer now. I know you all really want to be on it, so, you know, we can fight about it later. Okay. Objective 2, continue to increase collaboration, education, outreach with on-island groups involved in coastal resilience adaptation. Recommendation 1, work with local partners to develop, implement, and improve coastal resilience strategies. Prioritize nature-based solutions where possible. Examples include working with the Nantucket Conservation Commission to develop compensatory flood storage in the harbor, the Nantucket Conservation Foundation on nature-based methods of erosion control, and local landscapers to introduce more salt-tolerant native vegetation. Do you have any comments on this one? Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I'd just like Linda Loring to be added to this part.
Okay, very good. Leah, go ahead.
I would suggest instead of erosion control, erosion mitigation.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, recommendation 2, incorporate community-based science, i.e. opportunities for community members to help gather scientific data into the town's monitoring initiatives and engage the public, nonprofit, and volunteer organizations in town monitoring programs, for example, erosion and flood monitoring. Any comments from you guys? Any additions? Go ahead, Joanna.
I would like Mariah Mitchell to be added to this one.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, and I'd like us to be added too. See, this
Okay.
is where I'm like, what outreach and communications did both Mariah Mitchell and Linda Loring fail at, that we do this kind of work all the time and we have yet not been added. So that's where I was like, why aren't we on here? But I'm sure there's other groups too that already do this work that we should just be, like, the committee should just be tapping into, instead of, like, not to call out Mass Audubon, but Mass Audubon doesn't have any of these programs here on island. We have these in, they have these in other areas. So I'm just maybe thinking that, I don't know, through the Nantucket, and also it should say Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative, but maybe through other groups, that there should be more engagement with what that groups on island actually do.
Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I could add to that by sending you the spreadsheet that Leah and I developed. Remember when we were doing our outreach, and it included, I don't know, there might have been 50 different organizations that to some degree have the ability to affect community awareness and with their own independent work. So it could just be another source to add if it's useful. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, send it to me for sure, so that I could pass that on to Kim. Any other comments, Leah?
I think maybe we should just clarify that for this recommendation, it's focused on coastal resiliency data and stuff. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, recommendation 3, conduct education and outreach to encourage public awareness of coastal resilience and adaptation best practices. Examples include the Resilient Nantucket Toolkit and the Coastal Resilience Flyer for home buyers and real estate agents. Ensure that informational presentations and best practice brochures are accessible in adaptive formats, e.g. Video, audio, for non-English readers and speakers. Doug?
Sorry, just to clarify, Leo is right. I got ahead of myself. My previous comment pertains to this recommendation. It's really about who can reach an audience and help communicate. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Leah?
My 2 comments are the coastal resilience brochure instead of flyer, and then adding communications office to responsible parties.
Okay. Sarah Boyce?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna say both Linda Loring and Mariah Mitchell, not to volunteer, Joanna, but we already once again do this work.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right,
Can-
thanks, Sarah. Hold on. Thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, Joanna.
You know, it also occurs to me that in this section, wouldn't we welcome anyone who would be willing to distribute this information who has a vested interest? Because there are other, I mean, we could word it in a way that would say, Nantucket nonprofits in this area who are interested in assisting to distribute this information are welcome to assist, or something like that.
Sure. Absolutely.
But yes,
is there-
I would also like the MMA added to this.
Okay, go ahead, Rachel.
This is something we actually just inherently do all the time, so it would be great to add land bank as well. Thank you.
Okay. Still get your hand up, Joanna. Did you have something else?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. Recommendation 4, hire a dedicated coastal resilience and natural resource education coordinator and a dedicated coastal resilience and adaptation grant writer. In parentheses, can we provide more details on how this would be funded and what gaps it would fill? So obviously that's not finished, but any comments on that or additions? Go ahead, Leah.
I would take out the planning board, not sure how that's relevant, and add in finance committee.
Okay. Anyone else?
If I could,
Yes, Vince?
why finance committee and why not capital programs committee?
Because I was thinking that it would be a staff member, so that wouldn't be a capital project. It would be within the natural resources budget.
Gotcha.
Okay. Objective 3.
Whoops,
Can,
Peter, I have just a comment about that.
okay, go ahead.
I think you'd also have to put town administration in there because they kind of oversee all of the grant stuff for the town.
Okay. Rachel?
Thanks, Peter. I'm curious, you know, we had that super interesting conversation about embarkation fees. It's like, so this talks just about a grant writer. Is there a way to make it a little bit broader? So it's about, you know, somebody who's exploring funding, or is that unnecessary and couldn't be covered by the responsible parties?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I'm just looking for ideas from you guys. And
Right, I
then-
think I like
yeah.
the idea of a grant writer, but I also think it should be somebody who's really kind of exploring all funding opportunities and not just
Okay.
grants.
So when you guys come up with an idea, give me the explanation as best you can, knowing that other people are going to watch this section
Yeah.
of our meeting to put that into the plan. So the more you say, the better. So let's be here till 3 o'clock. Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Go
Can I
ahead,
add
Leah.
something?
Yep.
I would agree with Rachel. That should be expanded to other funding. And then having a dedicated education coordinator would relieve a lot of natural resources staff to be able to have a dedicated person to put together presentations and design work and just make it, you know, what we're doing here, be able to explain that to the public in a way that is relatable and understandable would be very, very helpful, because we spend a lot of time trying to put stuff together to put, you know, get out, and that takes time away from project management and, you know, other tasks that we still need to do.
Okay. Any more comments? Okay. Objective 3, continue to build coastal resilience within Nantucket and Mattocket harbors by improving infrastructure, which reduces the risk of coastal hazards, prioritizing nature-based approaches to the extent possible. Recommendation 1, improve and expand the resilience of the town's docks and piers through best available methods, incorporating public access and prioritizing nature-based solutions where possible. It is especially important to focus on where harbor infrastructure can contribute to regional resilience, e.g. where harbor facilities intersect with flood pathways for landward areas. Sites to consider include elevating Steamboat Wharf, raising town dock or converting to a floating dock, elevating the ramp at Children's Beach, elevating the F Street boat ramp in Mattocket. Comments? Go ahead, Leah.
So this is where my question about private entities coming into this, because, you know, Straight Wharf is eventually going to need to be adapted where the High Line comes in. So, but NIR owns that. So I guess my question to the implementation committee or harbor plan committee is whether private property owners should be added in here or not.
Well, you know, when the implementation committee gets going and they task the responsible parties, when they need to, will reach out to the private property owners that are in these areas when they need to. But again, you know, the implementation committee will be publicized. I'm assuming, but I cannot confirm, that the administrator, and that'll be Jeff probably, might send notices to those private property owners, but I don't know. So I guess it's up to us, the committee, to come up with a bullet item under responsible parties to be able to describe the public, the private people, private property owners. Maybe it just says private property owners or relevant private property owners or whatever we come up with.
Okay, so if private property owners are staying within here, then town docks and piers will have to be made broader. Just in that
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, recommendation 2, improve and expand the coastal resilience of road infrastructure within the harbor planning area through best available methods, incorporating public access and prioritizing nature-based solutions where possible. Sites to consider include raising Easton Street, Hulbert Avenue, Washington Street Extension, Consu Springs, and Pulpus Road. Raising Matticat Road and the Ames Avenue Bridge. Improving the resilience of Millie's Bridge and the Matticat Road Ames Avenue intersection through erosion management. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. I'm gonna advocate for Folgers Marsh and the Pulpus Road crossing here as being a extremely high priority. I guess you say raising Pulpus Road, but just to nail that in as being a priority, and that it's NCF would be a partner on that, maybe not a responsible party for all of these things, but on particular focused projects should be brought into the conversation on this.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Leah.
I would add Washington Street, Easy Street, and Broad Street to this list. And then it says Ames Avenue Bridge and Millie's Bridge. Those are the same thing. So
Yep.
just being consistent with that. I'd add sewer department, and if Rachel's okay, the land bank, since we're working with them on Washington Street.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, objective 4, continue to improve and diversify the town's ability to fund coastal resilience and adaptation projects. Recommendation 1, join the community rating system of the National Flood Insurance Program. This program provides discounts for flood insurance policyholders and floodplain expertise from municipalities based on efforts taken by the town for flood prevention measures beyond federal minimums, improving coastal resilience, and improving public awareness of flood risks. An additional funding source specific to harbors and infrastructure is the Mass Seaport Economic Council grants. Additional funding sources specific to habitat and natural resources include National Fish and Wildlife, I guess that's Federation, National Coastal Resilience Fund, and the Mass Coastal Zone Management Coastal Resilience Grants. Comments from anybody? Additions? Go ahead, Leah.
I would add the Planning and Land Use Services Department.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, recommendation 2, incorporate recommendations from the Coastal Resilience Plan into the town's capital funding process as a strategic goal. Go ahead, Leah.
I would take planning board out of this, add town administration, finance committee, and capital committee.
Okay. Go ahead, Joanna.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Okay, awesome. More comments, additions? Okay, recommendation 3, continue to pursue funding such as increased embarkation fees, Chapter 91 non-compliance penalties. And this is an internal question. Should this be included as one of these funding opportunities? State and federal grants, public-private partnerships, coastal resilience districts, and betterments within coastal resilience districts to ensure funding for resilience and adaptation projects. Note, to be discussed, there may be some conflicting opinions on whether increased embarkation fees are a good idea. Okay, anything on that? Joanna?
I think it should also include a stabilization fund and a revolving fund, such as the recommendations we made to the select board, right?
Okay.
And I think that under responsible parties, you need to add the FinCom and, yeah, the FinCom.
Okay. Leah?
I had that in too. And then I would say continue to explore and pursue funding instead of just pursue, because I don't think any of those are being pursued currently.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, recommendation 4, work with homeowners to increase their awareness and improve the responses to climate risks. Examples include offering tax subsidies to homeowners for taking proactive coastal resilience measures, such as moving vulnerable infrastructure, engaging the real estate agents to educate buyers about risks through the use of real estate flyers and other options, and developing programs and policies through which homeowners assume risk due to erosion caused loss of utilities or services. Joanna?
Oh, sorry, my hand is still up, sorry.
Okay, Doug?
Thanks, Peter. Leah, you might agree or disagree with me on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like some of this language really does begin to get at the strategic relocation plan, which is part of the CRP. So you might either want to explicitly reference that as it's a CRP project that's a high priority already, or you could incorporate this whole same recommendation under the earlier point about helping to pursue execution of CRP projects that are of relevance to harbors. Thanks.
Leah?
Yeah, I agree, Doug. I highlighted this section and said that's within the scope for the retreat and relocation program. My question is, what are they referring to as real estate flyers? Is that the brochure that we made? And if it
That's
is,
correct. That's
okay, then
correct.
it should be real estate brochure. And then instead of assume risk, acknowledge the risk due to flooding, add flooding and there was erosion, which may cause loss of utilities or services provided by the town of Nantucket.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, objective 5, continue to integrate climate resilience and adaptation measures into municipal regulations and bylaws. Recommendation 1, update municipal bylaws and regulations to address current and anticipated climate concerns with an emphasis on nature-based approaches. Examples include 1, integrating the best available flood protection into the town regulations to regulate activities in future flood-prone areas. Model language for zoning and wetlands is available through the Cape Cod Commission. 2, implementing coastal resilience districts to enhance planning, funding, and maintenance. And 3, promoting coordination across projects to ensure that they work together to provide regional benefits, e.g. align the heights of adjacent bulkheads. Other potential areas to explore include strategic retreat, moratoriums and development, including pools, homes, accessory dwelling units, decks, and redevelopment in flood-prone areas as strategies to have multiple benefits such as resilience and public access. Any contributions here? Leah?
In number 1, I would add current and future flood-prone areas. And then under number 3, I'd add, it says retreat, I'd add and relocation. And then for responsible parties, add Board of Health.
Okay. Joanna?
I think you have to add plus to responsible parties. One
For
of the, okay,
Plus, you mean planning land use?
yes.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Recommendation 3, develop and implement educational activities to encourage awareness of.
Peter, you missed recommendation 2.
So I did. Identify types of regulatory relief that may be necessary to facilitate adaptation and resilience projects. Joanna?
What does that mean?
Identify types of regulatory relief. So relief, like waivers.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay. Any more comments?
I've got just one minor one.
Go ahead, Leah.
Instead of Conservation Committee, just Conservation Commission.
Okay. More comments? Okay, recommendation 3, Develop and implement educational activities to encourage awareness of and compliance with bylaws and regulations. Go ahead, Leah.
I'd add communications office and Nantucket Land and Water Council.
Okay. Anyone else? Wait, we're done? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for going through this exercise with me, for putting thought into it and giving me your complete answers. And understand that we're still gathering information. So Urban Harbors and the committee will watch this section of our meeting and draw from it, hopefully incorporating everything that was said. And it's not over yet, so eventually, I don't know what the date is, but we'll be releasing this, I think, to town departments first, I think, and then eventually to the public. So there'll be more chances if you want to make comments on how we extrapolate what, or how we translate what was said here into the plan. So if you don't like it, you want to tweak it. And then there'll be the public sessions. So it's not over yet. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports from Planning Board, Concom, Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Select Board, Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, and other committee members. No, okay.
Wait.
Update. Wait.
We do.
Who?
Doug.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was on the agenda, so I figured you'd call on me next. I know we're almost out of time. I'll make it really quick, and then Leah, if you can chime in on anything I'm overlooking. Just the top line summary of the initial meeting that we had with the planning team on that work group, how to incorporate coastal resilience language and updating our zoning regulations to accommodate changes that are coming from the state and elsewhere. Very quickly, we spent about 90 minutes together. Dave Iverson as the representative for the planning board on CRAC, as well as Megan Trudell, and Leah and myself got together with Shannon Hulst, who is a real godsend to us in this project. Her knowledge and experience has been really, really helpful. The five of us got together. We talked for 90 minutes. We very quickly identified two buckets: a bucket of things that need to happen quickly, and there's really no reason to wait. And then there's a much bigger bucket probably of things that will involve a lot more discussion, development. It could take months to really work through. Megan Trudell has taken on the assignment of working on the things that we know to be mandatory to ensure that Nantucket remains compliant with federal regulations and allows Nantucket homeowners to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. These are that's a kind of a no-brainer, but we need to catch up and make sure we're compliant on that. And then, as I said, there's a number of other buckets that we need to be working on. And I know Leah's already made progress in reaching out to Concom and HDC to initiate the conversations of work that needs to be done with those groups as well. So Leah, chime in if there's something I've overlooked. Thanks.
I have nothing to add. That was great, Doug.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Update on Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project, Leah Hill.
Yes, thank you. So our grant with CZM is ending next month, and there has not been a preferred alternative that's going to be moving to 30% design by June. What we've decided to do is we'll still have a final report on all three of the design options that will go into detail on all three of them. And then we are going to update the scope a bit so that the 3D pictures that we have for the different designs are going to incorporate access to private properties, what that may look like. We're going to increase the outreach and engagement portion of the project. And then we're going to update the modeling with the three new design options. So working with Woods Hole Group to see if there will be any negative impacts on abutting properties. And then we will be giving an update to the select board once we have that information and providing the select board with any answers to their questions that they had a couple months ago at the meeting. So project is still moving forward, but that 30% design will not be getting by June. I have one more update. The Coastal Conference is on June 10th, which is a scheduled crack meeting. So I would propose, instead of having the meeting virtual, if people come in person to this free conference that is all revolving around coastal resiliency, both on and off island. It's at the Great Harbor Yacht Club from 9 to 5, and there's free lunch. So registration is open, and I sent all of you the flyer. So please register.
You guys like that idea?
I make a
Yes.
motion to not have a June 10th meeting, and instead we all go to the Coastal Conference.
Do I have a second to that?
I'll second free lunch.
Can I just,
Okay,
if there's
discussion,
quorum,
go ahead. Yep.
sorry, if there's quorum, I'm still gonna have to post it. So
Okay,
it'll be
maybe
it'll be an in-person meeting instead of virtual.
I don't know if I can see you guys in person. I think I just, oh, yeah, I'll be there. For sure. Okay. The motion was made by Sarah Boyce, was seconded by Matt Fee. All those in favor, Gary Beller,
I'm going to abstain because I'm not on island that week.
okay. Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Doug Rose,
I'll have to abstain for the same reason.
okay, you guys are missing out. Rachel Freeman,
Aye, and I actually
Matt
have to
Fee.
jump off. Thank you.
Okay. Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Okay. Okay, so the next meeting is May 27th, 2025 on Zoom. And I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion to adjourn, moved by Matt Fee, seconded by Doug Rose. All those in favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Doug Rose,
Aye.
Jennifer Carberg,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. All right, you guys, thanks for a great meeting. Thanks for contributing. Really appreciate it. Beautiful day out there. 3 days of gray, so go outside.